In this video, we're going to do three things. We're going to do first, we're going to get the points that are carrying over to show up properly in our HUD. This won't take long. It's really just one line of code. Second, we're going to no longer use the timer, but instead we're going to have the player left click to advance in levels. And third, we're going to get the game to reset properly if the player dies. We're actually just going to restart the level is what we're going to do. But later we might get into resetting the level. But for right now, what we're going to do is we're going to go into Puzz Game, and we are going to try to find our game in progress state. And inside of our game in progress state, we're going to go into our begin state, and underneath our for each iterator that we do, where we set the Puzz HUD, we're going to then underneath that, after we have our Puzz HUD, we're going to say phud.puzzhudmovie.add to score player points. So when the game first starts and we hit game in progress, it's going to add the points of player points. As I mentioned, since we've been saving this in config in our ini file since the beginning, if you actually go inside of your udkgame.ini file in our config, down at the very bottom you might see an area called puzzlegame.puzzgame, and you'll see player points equals, and you might have some number there. I had a large number there as well. If you reset this to 0 and then save the file, then that'll reset your points back to 0. So if you wanted to start over from 0, you can, though it really doesn't matter at this point. Later we'll be bringing in a new game option, or using the new game option to its full extent, which will then reset the score to 0 for us. And on top of that, we'll obviously be bringing in, the loading a feature where we can load save games, which will then load the proper points for that game as well. Okay, so putting in this one line of code will, like I said, it will make sure that we set the HUD to the amount of player points that the player had at the beginning of the map, as opposed to it being started off at 0 every single time the game starts. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get it so that the player can left click in order to move to the next level. After he collects all the objectives and gets in the portal, we'll have him just left click to move on to the next level instead of use a timer. A timer is really not the way to go anyway, because you kind of want to bring in some sort of ability for the player to move on when he's ready, not just some timer that says, okay, now you have to move on to the next level. What we're going to do is, inside of our level completed, we're going to remove that set timer code. We're going to remove that line, and then we're going to put puzzplayer.goToState, and then we're going to put level completed. So we're going to have the player controller go to a state called level completed. That's a state we'll be creating in a second. And also, when inside of this state level completed, we had a timer in here. You want to delete the timer, but keep the code. Copy the code, but delete all the functionality inside the state for function timer, and then paste the code into a function called advanced level. And that advanced level is going to hold the exact same code as the timer did. There's nothing different, and we're just going to call in that function from the Puzz player controller. And also we might call it for other reasons too. Who knows? But that way it's in its own function, so we can call it if needed. So we go to Puzz player controller, and inside Puzz player controller we have our state called level completed. And in there we're going to put an exec function called start fire, and we're going to say puzzgame.worldinfo.game.advancedLevel, and inside of there. So what we're going to do is we're going to call on our Puzz games function called advanced level when we're in state level completed, when the player presses the left or right mouse button, because that's what start fire is connected to at this moment. So whenever they left click or right click, that will proceed to move the game along. Also, just in case if the player wants to jump or hit another button, we threw the jump also to say start fire. So we kind of overwrote jump to start fire. So now if they also click the jump button, that will also cause the game to advance in level. It will just pretty much call that function, which will then call this function. The other thing we do is, inside of function begin state, when we first enter this level completed state, we want to set the pawn's acceleration to 0, and we want to set the pawn's ground speed to 0. And the reason for this is because sometimes when you enter a different state outside of player walking, if the player still has some sort of acceleration, what will happen is the player will just kind of keep walking, because we turn off the player's ability to stop his pawn from moving once we leave the player walking state. We no longer have control of that. So by doing this, we make sure that if for some reason the pawn doesn't stop on its own, this will force it to stop. Next, what we want to do is we want to make sure that when the player dies, he has to start over from scratch. Now, you may not want to do this. You may like the fact that the player dies, he has to figure out a way to complete the level after he's already collected some of the items. Since we don't have any of the pickup factors respawning, that will remove any chance of him basically, if he uses up his like a power attack ability or his blast attack ability, it'll use up his chances of using that again. Now you could set these pickup factors to respawn, which would then fix that issue. He would just have to sit around and wait for the respawn moment, and then he would have another chance. Uh, but that's not really the best way I think about going about this puzzle. So what we're going to do is it's basically you have one shot. If you fail, you start over. And in order for us to make sure everything restarts the way we want it to, we're going to call on a function called restart game, and that pretty much just reloads the level. Now, there's also an option called reset level. Reset level works or can work as well, except we're going to have to add extra code in order to make reset level work properly. So right now we're just going to stick with restart game, and then later we may get into reset level, which doesn't involve loading the game again. It just involves restarting everything except for the map itself. So we'll get into that later if we decide to go that route instead of use restart game. Either way, they both accomplish the same thing. It's just restart game requires, like I said, reloading the map, so it might take like a few seconds longer. But outside of that, it won't be anything crazy. And that pretty much completes this video. At this point now, when the player dies, he can restart the game. When the player completes a level, he can left click to to move through the levels. And of course, we also fixed, like I said earlier, we fixed the points so that we can actually see the points we've accumulated through each level as we've done this.